You're listening to episode 55 of A Whole New You podcast. On today's show, Lori interviews Jessica Procini, an emotional eating healer and the founder of Escape from Emotional Eating. They discuss the 4 roots of emotional eating, and Jessica gives some tips on how to move through the feelings in order to find freedom. Welcome to A Whole New You podcast. I'm your co-host, Kim Maravich. I'm a registered nurse and author of the book 360 Health. I'm joined by my dear friend, Lori Biddle, a health and wellness coach certified through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. Our show exists to inspire and empower women to take charge of their health, with weekly tips and conversation about self-care, mindset, nutrition, fitness, and clean living. Please keep in mind that the material provided in this podcast is intended as general information only and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We're thrilled to have you here. Let's get to the show.
Before we get to the interview, I'd like to make a quick announcement. As many of you know, I have a health coaching practice, Simply Empowered LLC. I have opened up 30-minute virtual one-on-one goal-setting sessions on Fridays this month. There are still some spots open January 17th, 24th, and 31st. The cost is $20, and we will map out your health goals and put together a realistic plan to ensure they are met. You will head into the new year with 2020 vision. I'm going to be including a link in the show notes today, but you also can access the sign up on my Instagram bio and also on the Simply Empowered Facebook page. Welcome to another episode of A Whole New You podcast. Today I have with me Jessica Procini. She is an emotional eating healer and the founder of Escape from Emotional Eating. She is on a mission to help others use food as fuel rather than a way to cope, soothe, or escape their busy, stressful life. She consciously created and specifically designed Escape from Emotional Eating for over a decade of research and her own emotional eating journey, because Overeaters Anonymous didn't resonate and therapy wasn't enough when it came to getting help to fully end her fight with food. Now, being 100% free from her compulsions with food, she helps others do the same through all her levels of support, such as her retreats called The Escape, her year-long transformational programs, and through her various public talks, events, and workshops. Jessica, I am so thrilled to get into this topic today because as most of our listeners know, I am also a practicing health coach, and I see this as a major roadblock all the time with, a lot of women I work with and talk to. And, these roots run really deep. So it's going to be great to dive into this today and start to unpack it with you and, how we can help ourselves and, help other women. And we just really appreciate you taking time to be here with us today.
I am so excited to be here and just so appreciate how you already recognize how deep these roots go with emotional eating, because they go pretty deep.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not an easy fix. It's, there's a lot of things that I've found with my coaching that a little bit of like perspective shift can go a long way. But when this is something that you've struggled with, for many, many, many years, that's just not going to cut it. And I am a mother of teenage girls, and this is just something that, number one, it scares me because, just knowing what they're growing up with in this generation with the social media world and everything else that I didn't have as a teenager. So that, frightens me a little bit. But just in general about creating this good relationship with food, starting from when they're kids, all the way through adulthood. But I know a lot of times like that didn't happen for a lot of us women when we were in that position, so that's why we're, in the place we are today. I would love to just really take a minute on the front end of this podcast and talk about like what exactly is emotional eating.
Yeah. So the way that I define emotional eating is using food for a purpose other than fuel, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
just keeping it super simple that any time that we are using food for a purpose other than fuel, it is emotional eating. And I often get, people get kind of angry or miffed when I say that definition because they're like, but shouldn't eating be an emotional experience? And yes, it often is because we are emotional beings, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really about the primary intention, right? The primary intention of eating is to nourish our bodies. The secondary intention is to receive pleasure and joy, and even that is emotionally nourishing. However, it's when those intentions get flipped, right? When we're seeking food for emotional needs first, that it is called emotional eating. And emotional eating has nothing to do with heavy you are, or how thin you are, or how old you are, or how healthy you eat. When I was an emotional eater, a lot of my emotional eating was with healthy food. And for many, many years, I was just in this cycle of I'm eating healthy. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I'm not losing weight. I don't know why I don't feel good in my body. And a large part of it was because I was operating under this stereotype that so many of us have, that in order to be an emotional eater, you have to have hundreds of pounds to lose. And I will be completely honest that my emotional eating was at its worst when I was a health coach, when I was going through health coaching school, and no, like through that whole education process, through all the coaches that I worked with, no one had said, Jessica, what you are doing is emotional eating. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do and sharing this message and even this definition, because I know for myself, if I had known I was emotionally eating even a year or two earlier, it would have saved me so much time and energy. And if I can do that for someone now, right, if I can save them literally years of their life so that they can truly have freedom and peace with food, then, I've fulfilled my mission here on this planet.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's interesting that, for you personally, you were kind of going through this as you were, getting your health coaching certification and talking to a lot of different people in the industry and learning so much about it. So for you, was it like stress? Like what was the emotion that was leading you to food? Was it stress from the schooling? Was it here's another one that I see sometimes
Mhm.
too. It's like trying to stay so rigid, or trying to always do the right thing where, or whatever, is considered the right thing, which I can see like during health coaching school, a lot of times you're learning different theories and all of
Mhm.
that. Is it almost like a rebellious thing? Like where do you think yours stemmed from?
So, my emotional eating, my earliest memory of emotional eating was actually when I was 6 years old.
Okay, yeah.
So it wasn't isolated to stressful experiences in my life. From the outside, like when I was beginning to look at it, like I could tie it to stressful experiences, like going back and getting my MBA. I remember before I would sit down to write a paper, I would go to the freezer and get out dairy-free ice cream and a spoon and eat the whole carton before I sat down to write a paper.
Mhm.
And then in nutrition school, and then like even in my teens. But my earliest memory was when I was 6 years old, and I was with my older brother, and we were at a neighbor's house, and they were playing video games, and my brother was watching me that day. And I remember being bored and sneaking upstairs because we were playing in the basement. I remember sneaking upstairs and going into the kitchen and pulling a chair over to the counter so I could reach the cookie jar, and sticking my little teeny tiny 6-year-old hand in that cookie jar and eating every last cookie that was in that jar, putting it back, putting the chair back, and sneakily going back downstairs.
And that one was out of boredom, right? Yeah, you were like, I just am bored. I feel like getting a little mischief, but
Yeah.
then it's a whole
So
thing of cookies. Yeah.
stress and boredom, like these are very big terms. They are not the roots of it.
Yeah.
So like when we talk about stress is actually a tangled ball of emotions, which are like when I'm working with my clients, they'll say like, I'm stressed. And it's like, great, like let's, really untangle what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can mean so many different things to so many different people. Same thing with bored. Like it can just mean so many different things. So when we talk about emotional eating, like we have to get deeper underneath those things. And back to your question of what was it for me? Well, what was really at the root of my emotional eating was my research and the discovery that there are actually 4 roots of emotional eating. And
Okay.
like that's, my 6-year-old experience. One of the roots is safety and a need to feel safe. And as a little girl and as a child, like I often did not feel safe in my body, my skin, in my life as a very sensitive person. And food quickly became a way that I could feel some sense of safety, even if it was superficial or sort of on a surface level. Food for me, like one of the major roots that was activated for me was that food was a safety and a coping. And as long as I had food around, I knew I would be okay.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's one of the 4 roots, safety. But I'd love to hear, and maybe I'm jumping ahead because maybe we're going to get to this later. But I'm curious, what those other 3 categories are. As far as the roots of emotional eating.
So these are the 4 emotional needs that are correlated with the roots. So one of the emotional needs is safety.
Mm-hmm.
Another is a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Another is happiness or joy, and then another is love. And these 4 roots I've directly connected them to what human beings need on a psychological level to exist, right? Like this goes way beyond just food, that if we do not feel a sense of these 4 emotional needs fulfilled in some capacity, we literally won't wake up and go about our day, right? Like we have to feel a sense of safety to some degree to be able to move within our lives. But it's usually when things get very chaotic or there's a lot of change or there's a sense of unknown is when one of these areas can really be depleted. And that's when we'll try to fill it with food.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So sometimes I imagine it can even be a combination of a few of these kind of going on simultaneously.
Yeah. So when I work with my clients, one of the things that we practice is really looking at the emotional eating experience, but then following it all the way down to the root, and
Mhm.
really looking at, like what are the emotional needs here? What are the roots that are activated? And what is the coping cycle that is currently activated? And we can take any emotional eating experience, follow it down to the roots, and one or a combination of these roots will be activated every single time. Every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah, and I bet, like, as you mentioned, different experiences, which even just your personal situation, you had different experiences at different times of your life, which probably looked different, but the root of it may have been very similar each time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
in contrast to that example of like my 6-year-old, emotional eating experience, the way it tended to show up more in my adult life is just having a long, stressful day, coming home from work, just going right to the pantry and getting my hands in some dark chocolate. And like to me, that felt very different than eating a whole jar of cookies when I was 6. To me, that was like, oh, like this is just sort of like a treat at the end of the day. There's
Yeah.
so much underneath the surface. There's so much that, any emotional eating experience can tell us about what we need. The problem is that so many of us have not been taught how to interpret our emotional needs or even understand the emotional language of our bodies. And for me, I was always told, like, don't show your feelings. You're too emotional. And I learned at a very early age to shut them down. But what I've come to learn now is that actually our emotions are one of our greatest teachers. They are a wellspring of wisdom if we can only understand the language. And that's why, I'm really honored to be talking with you, Lori, especially because you have 2 daughters. And this is such a potent time to teach them, how do we relate to our emotions in a healthy way so we're not shutting them down, because anytime that we shut any part of ourselves down, it will act itself out in an unhealthy way, in whether it's with food or shopping or relationships or whatever it may be. And I feel such a sort of like a passion to teach the mothers and the fathers and the parents of today how they can heal their relationship with food, so then they can teach their children how to have a healthy relationship with food. And that's really how I believe true change will occur.
Now we'd like to take a minute to give a shout out to our show partners, Perfect Supplements and Amazon. Perfect Supplements is a family-owned and operated business that supports local farms. Their superfoods and supplements are non-GMO, third-party tested for purity, and contain no synthetic ingredients, colors, or flavors. They're also organic or wild harvested and fairly traded. Products range from collagen and bone broth powders to plant proteins, greens, desiccated liver, and adaptogenic herbs. Perfect also carries vitamins and supplements from other reputable sources, like Just Thrive, Dr. Mercola, Gaia Herbs, Green Pastures, Garden of Life, and Prescript Assist. To check out their wide array of products, go to perfectsupplements.com/Kim. If you use coupon code KIM10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. This is a great way to get superfood nutrition while helping to support our podcast. And just as a disclaimer, it's not the intention of our podcast to provide specific medical advice, but rather to provide you with information to better understand the role of dietary supplements in health. We urge you to consult with a qualified health provider to discuss both the advantages and risks of using dietary supplements. Our other show partner, Amazon, is the largest online warehouse and carries just about everything you need. If you shop on Amazon, which is likely, you can support our show at the same time at no additional cost to you. Simply use our affiliate link to enter the site, then browse and buy, just as you normally would. A Whole New You podcast will make a small commission from your purchase, which helps to support production costs for the show. You can find a clickable Amazon link in the show notes for this episode. You can also go to the products page of our website, awholenewyouPodcast.com, to find the link. If you love our show and appreciate the free information you get each week, please consider buying from Perfect or using our affiliate link when making purchases on Amazon. Now let's get back to the show.
And it's such a good point about like feeling your emotions. Especially teenage girls, right? They have a roller coaster of emotions. But
yep. It's such a prime emotional learning time. Like it's where emotional intelligence and more like emotional consciousness and acceptance and acknowledgement really needs to to come in.
Yeah. And, I literally just had this conversation with my girls in the car on the way home from church this weekend because the sermon was talking. We go to a Lutheran church, and I love the
Mhm.
sermons all the time because they're so relatable to like everyday life. But basically, they were talking about the crucifixion and all of this, but it pointed back to feeling all the feels around that, all the
Mhm.
sadness, the anger, like all the things that you feel, and just letting yourself feel it. So then, they kind of went into that a little deeper about our emotions and everything. So on the car ride home, I was saying that to my girls, like, if you're mad, just be mad. If you're sad, just cry, let it out. Like, you gotta feel these emotions. And I know they're coming quickly and they're changing fast. And you don't know if you're coming or going half the time, but like you gotta acknowledge them. So it's just funny that
Mhm.
you're saying this right now because we literally just had that conversation.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you're having this conversation with your girls because my childhood was the exact opposite. It was like, don't feel your feelings. You're too emotional. Like, do that in your room, but don't let anyone see you crying or getting upset. Like, no one else is crying. Like, what's wrong with you? And food was a major way that I could stuff down and numb out what I was feeling. But
Hmm.
so much of my path to healing and freedom was not just learning to feel my feelings, because that was something I would always hear in therapy. Feel your feelings, feel your feelings. And I'm like, listen, therapist, if I feel my feelings, I feel like I am going to go in there and not come out alive. I was like, I have to get up in the morning. I have to go to work. Like, feeling my feelings isn't really an option because if I feel them, I'm going to be down and out for weeks. And they like, sort of like brush that off. But that was like really what it felt like. I didn't feel safe to
Hmm.
feel the intensity of my feelings. And that was really where I realized like I needed a tool to be able to move through my feelings, not just feel them, but to be able to transform them so I could be free. Because what would happen to me is I would feel my feelings and then like get stuck in them and end up camping out there forever. Like where I could like feel something for like weeks at a time in an unhealthy way. So I created a process called digesting emotions because I needed a way to feel and then move into healing. I needed
Hmm.
to feel and then be able to reclaim my power, reclaim my like mind and brain space and be able to move through it, to be able to take action, to give myself what I really needed instead of wallowing in it or getting stuck. And I feel like that's something that a lot of my clients were not taught when they were younger, even of today. I mean, we all have stories of a lot of difficulty in our lives, but we haven't been taught how to move through it in one piece without destroying ourselves in the process.
Oh, I love that. Digesting emotions. That's really
Mhm.
good stuff. Yes.
Yeah, because everything that we're talking about, one of the things that I say is that, like, just like we have to go to the bathroom physically every day to keep a healthy, hygienic body, we also have to emotionally go to the bathroom, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're all walking around emotionally constipated. And that's really what digesting emotions provides is a pathway to like emotionally release, to emotionally let go, and then be able to move on with our day or whatever we need to do.
Okay, and how do you get people doing that? Do you have them journal? Is that sometimes a useful tool for that, just to kinda get those emotions out and work through them? Like, talk to people, cry, like, or, a little bit of everything, I guess, maybe depending on the situation.
Yeah, so the digesting emotions process is a written process because
Okay.
that is the fastest, most convenient way to get emotions out of the body. For a
Mm-hmm.
lot of emotional eaters, like we've become estranged from crying. like,
Yep.
like we're like, I haven't cried in 2 years because we've just shut it down for so long. So, one of like the digesting emotions process is a written process. It has 9 steps to it. And for example, like the first step is simply asking, how do I feel? And when we work in the digesting emotions process, we work with the 5 major emotions. So they are mad, sad, glad, scared, and bad. And we keep it to those 5 emotions because if we start getting into like, well, I feel frustrated and I feel, you know, all these other feelings, like it just gets into emotional overwhelm. And the
Mm-hmm.
intention of digesting emotions is to cut through emotional overwhelm. So we keep it to the 5 major emotions. So we start with, how do I feel? And then identifying one or the combination of emotions that you would be feeling. So maybe you feel glad and mad at the same time. And you can already see, like, if someone's feeling mad and glad at the same time, that can feel very conflicting on the inside. So that's where, like, the digesting emotions process starts the untangling and unraveling, and it's sort of like cleaning out your emotional closet in some ways. And then we can start to work through the process from there. But it is written. There are tools that I have that are physicalized, but we typically don't do those until we're together on our retreats in a safe, sacred space where my clients feel safe to express themselves, and we're safe together, and they know that there's a way out. They're not just going to get stuck in their emotions by themselves.
Yes, that's a big deal. That's a
Mhm.
big deal. And I want to circle back to your retreats. But before, because I'm curious about that myself, but before we dive into that, I want to just kind of talk about, digesting emotions. I love this process. That is a super powerful tool. I love that it's written, and it's kind of like you said, you have to go through it. You have to go
Mhm.
through it, and it's like this deep inner work, and it is some work. Like you have to put the effort and you have to put the work in order to come out on the other side. So, just upping the exercise and eating healthier and maybe even going to therapy doesn't always necessarily, repair your relationship with food. Maybe it's like a band-aid, right? A temporary band-aid.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Eating healthier and exercising and going to therapy, if those worked for emotional eaters, we would all be healed.
Mhm.
Like the 932 hours I spent on the therapy couch would have worked. And that's not an exaggeration. I literally did spend 932 hours on a therapy couch. Um, Going multiple times a week, and it never touched my relationship with food. It
Hmm.
was too general. It was too surfacey. It was more about like venting my feelings. But the thing that would happen to me is I would leave that therapist office and I would go home and I would be right back compulsively eating again. I would be right back in the same old patterns and habits. And well, as I said before, like I was already eating healthy. I was already exercising every day, sometimes 2 times a day, thinking that if I just eat healthier, if I can just control what I'm putting in my body, then I'll be free.
Mhm.
And didn't even come close, because everything that we're talking about is not about, is it the cookies or the carrot sticks? It's about like your emotional well-being, and that's why it's called emotional eating, because it has everything to do with our emotions. If it was just about eating healthier and working out more and going to more therapy, we would have like no emotional eaters in the world today. They just wouldn't exist. But in order to really heal emotional eating, it has to be specific. It has to be direct work that we work on. It has to bridge the gap between the mind and the body. We just have to get to the roots of it and pull it out from the roots. And one of the analogies I always talk about is sort of like weeding your garden, right? Like you have two options to weed your garden. You can chop all of your weeds off at the soil level, and I'm sure everyone knows they're going to grow back in 2 weeks. Or you can pull those weeds out from the root and they'll never grow back again. And that's what we have to do with emotional eating. We have to pull it out from the root. Diet, meal plans, portion control, just eating healthier, exercising more, going to some therapy. That's just chopping the weeds off at the soil level. They're going to grow back. Give yourself 2 weeks. You'll be back emotionally eating again. We got to get deeper. We got to do it differently. We got to access the roots and heal it from there.
That's a great analogy. And I'm sure that's not a quick process. That takes some time to unpack all of that. So tell us a little bit about these retreats that you do. How long are they and kind of what's all involved?
Yeah. So I've been doing retreats. Coming up, I'll be leading my 11th one. And I do them twice a year. And they're a part of each of my programs here at Escape from Emotional Eating. So we come together. They're a small, intimate group because it's important that everyone is seen. Here at Escape from Emotional Eating, you're not just a number. You are a very important, beautifully complex person that gets such in-depth support. So it's a very small group of people who are driven and really committed to healing the roots of their emotional eating. And a lot of the people that I work with are very driven and successful in a lot of areas of their life, except for this one with food. And we come together for 3 and 4 days, depending on what program you would be in. And the way that I've been structuring the retreats is that we focus a retreat on one of the roots. So coming up, we'll be looking at one of the roots. Is called self-abnegation, and it's connected to that emotional need for a sense of belonging. So that is the theme of our retreat, and that is everything that we focus on for the 3 and 4 days together of that in-depth healing work. But one of my favorite things about the retreats is our meal time together. It's just such a radical experience to be in a community of people, to have this sacred meal experience, to have stepped out of the day-to-day busyness and be on this retreat. It is a complete shift in perspective when it comes to eating together on the retreat. And what I love about our meals together is that it's a direct hands-on food experience. And everyone leaves so changed, even just from lunch together, that they take that home and they have that of like, I did this, I experienced this, so that when they go home, it's just, they just keep doing what we did together on the retreat. And I've had people come to a retreat emotionally eating almost every day, stepping into the retreat and then stepping out of the retreat being more than 2 weeks where they hadn't emotionally eaten after the retreat. And that is a massive, massive first step to go from every day to then 2 weeks. And then we build on from there. Like I have other clients who haven't emotionally eaten in 7 months. I have other clients who can't even remember the last time they emotionally ate. But what I love about the retreats is the hands-on, intimate, in-person, in-depth work that we do together because everyone leaves so changed from those retreats. Why I keep doing them, honestly.
That is fantastic. And, not only are you talking through things and writing things, but then, like you said, these meal times, you're experiencing it, which is different than any sort of therapy, right? Like that therapist isn't coming with you in your day to day life and just like going through, physically going through some of these things with you. Like you are
Mhm.
on the retreat, sitting down, having a meal, and you guys are having that experience in addition to the talking through things. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, like also one of the things on the retreats is we have dessert, and
Mhm.
like that can just really trigger some people because a lot of superficial ways to try to heal emotional eating is just abstain from certain foods. But that doesn't work because, like the retreat, there will be experiences that we have where we have to engage with food that might be triggering, like dessert for some people. But the retreat provides an opportunity to reprogram, to do it differently. Emotional eating is a learned behavior that needs to be unlearned.
Mhm.
And by being on the retreat, we have that opportunity to unlearn it. And that's why we have dessert, because I know for myself, I wouldn't want to live a life where I just can't eat like a long list of foods. That's not really freedom to me. That's not peace. But it's about, I want to be able to eat those foods and I want to be at peace. I don't want to feel compulsive. I don't want to, be thinking about it even after it's over or before it happens. Like, I just want to be able to eat and move on. And that is my experience now. And that's everything that I teach my clients as well.
Yes, and I recently did another interview on eating disorders and healing, eating disorders, and
Hmm.
I think one of the big takeaways, and it's kind of along the same lines as what you just said, is what really kind of defines disordered eating is the percentage of time that you're thinking about it, like the amount of your life that revolves around food,
Hmm.
be it, indulging or be it on the full other end of the spectrum where, you're so busy like food prepping or whatever, or like thinking about how many calories you're not going to eat, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a really good point. And the big thing too is just, like this whole new awareness, that you're creating and just like moving forward with intention and
Hmm.
yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah. And another thing, that I love about the retreats is that it like gives them a taste of what freedom is like,
Mhm.
right? And then it supports the unhooking from the emotional eating cycle even more, because a lot of my clients will say like, oh, like food isn't cutting it for me anymore. Like food isn't taking the edge off like it used to. Like it's just not working for me anymore. Because we've created such a consciousness around the experience. And that's where then the freedom of choice can come in. Whereas like, this isn't working. I don't want to emotionally eat anymore. Right. And
Mhm.
and to choose to do things differently with our relationship with food.
Yeah, and once you get a taste of that freedom, it feels good, huh?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I've been free from emotional eating for 4 years now. It's been 4 years since I've emotionally eaten or overeaten in any capacity. And I always say I'll never go back. I will never ever go back to that time. That was one of the darkest, most difficult 20 years of my life, being in that love-hate relationship with food. It took so much time and energy, and I will never, ever go back.
Yeah, well, congratulations on, making it to the other side of that and helping so many other people through it as well. Like, that's just such wonderful work that you're doing, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Anything else that you want to share with us in closing today?
For those who are listening, if you are wondering, am I an emotional eater? Or even if you have a sense that your relationship with food is holding you back, I invite you to go over to escapefromemotionaleating.com. There's a free quiz on my website. And if you sense your relationship with food is holding you back, and if you're wondering, if you're an emotional eater, or even if you know you're an emotional eater and you want to know what to do about it, take the free quiz on escapefromemotionaleating.com. And it's a very eye-opening self-assessment where you'll answer a couple of questions, and then it'll give you your results and tell you next steps and what to do from there, so that freedom and peace can be your relationship with food.
Oh, great. And I will put a link to that in the show notes too, just to make it really nice and easy for our listeners. They can just page down
Great.
on the podcast episode and click on it. And that's a really, really nice tool. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, this was super informative, very, very important to get to the root of these issues. And great that you are doing that. And you've given us some great things to think about today, to start that process for ourselves.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me and, opening it up to this conversation, because the more that we can talk about emotional eating, the less shame and embarrassment there is around it. And there really is nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about if we're struggling in our relationship with food. We just haven't been taught. I wasn't taught. And, I'm so grateful that I can share what I now know with other people, because I truly believe this is the most important education that we will ever have, is how to truly feed ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
That's it for today. For more from Kim, you can go to kimmaravich.com. For more from Lori, go to simplyempoweredllc.com. We're always open to listener questions or suggestions for the show. You can email those to contact@awholenewyoupodcast.com. We'd also love it if you joined our Facebook community and followed us on Instagram. Just search for A Whole New You Podcast. And lastly, if you'd be so kind as to leave us a rating and review in iTunes, we would really appreciate that, so more people can find our show and join our community. We'll see you next week.